A couple puts their sleeping daughter into the oven. After a serious look at each other, they quickly close the oven. The girl wakes up and kicks the door open, getting out. The father, showing no kindness, steps on her, while the mother covers her mouth. They put her back in the oven, tape the door shut, and turn on the heat. Even though the girl cries desperately, the couple doesn't change their minds, knowing that if she lives, they will be in trouble. The police break down the door. "Hello, Nacho here, and welcome back." A social worker finds and saves the girl from the oven. The father tries to attack the officers but is quickly stopped. The mother, with a knife, also fails to complete her plan. A few days later, the couple goes to court for hurting their daughter, but the judge says they are mentally ill and sends them to a psychiatric hospital. Social worker Emily is very angry that the couple isn't being properly punished. She believes the justice system has failed and is determined to fight for more appropriate consequences.
Punishment. But soon, she will know how terrifying the girl's true nature is. The story begins a few days earlier. Emily, a compassionate social worker, has dedicated her life to ensuring that everyone don't grow up in unsafe households. Her colleague, Wayne, hands her a case involving a girl named Lilith Sullivan, suspected of being neglected. She glances at the file and sees the girl's photo inside. After spending some time reviewing Case 39, which is Lilith Sullivan's case, her curiosity is piqued. The next morning, she heads straight to the Sullivan residence, where Lilith's mother greets her with a cold demeanor. Emily requests to meet with the entire family, and it is immediately clear that something is amiss, as the father outright refuses to speak with her. Most of the time, the parents awkwardly avoid eye contact, while the mother insists that they have no family issues. When Emily returns to the office that day, she confides in Wayne, convinced that Lilith isn't safe, because the parents seem to be hiding something serious. She persuades Wayne to invite the family to the office. When the family arrives, for some reason, the father suddenly becomes eloquent. He tries to convince Emily and Wayne that there is nothing wrong with their family. Despite his words, Emily remains certain that something is very wrong. Later, she finds Lilith and finally has a chance to speak with her alone.
What's happening with you?
After some coaxing, Lilith begins to admit to the problems with her parents. She also confesses that, for whatever reason, her parents want to send her to hell.
Sending me to hell?
This revelation only deepens Emily's concern. Emily brings Lilith to Wayne, asking the girl to make a formal statement about what her parents have done. But this time, Lilith remains silent. Without concrete evidence of injury, Wayne tells her to drop the case. Of course, this doesn't deter Emily. She goes to see her friend Mike, a police officer, who tells her he can't do anything until she provides solid evidence of injury. Later that night, while Emily is relaxing alone in her living room, she receives a distressed phone call from Lilith. The girl says she is terrified,
Waiting to get me.
because her parents are going to hurt her, and apologizes, saying she can no longer stay awake. This drives Emily out of her house, heading straight for the Sullivan home. On her way, she calls Officer Mike, pleading with him to meet her at the scene. Together, they arrive just in time to prevent Lilith's parents from hurting her. Lilith's parents are placed in a psychiatric hospital, while Lilith is set to be taken to a state facility until they can find her a foster home. However, as Emily is taking her to the state home, Lilith says she doesn't want to stay there. She wants to live with Emily because Emily is a caring person. With a heavy heart, Emily initially says no, knowing it would create a conflict of interest in her line of work. But she eventually gives in, feeling an emotional attachment to the girl. She then convinces the board to allow Lilith to stay with her, and she succeeds. Afterward, Emily returns to tell Lilith the good news. In the next scene, Emily visits Lilith's old home to pick up some of her belongings. There, she discovers scratches on the floor and multiple padlocks inside the parents' bedroom door. This indicates that, for some reason, Lilith's parents lock themselves in their room every night. Later, Emily returns to work, watching as Lilith participates in group therapy for those with family issues. In this scene, we witness a boy named Diego sharing how he was bullied at school because of his parents' marital problems. The next day, Emily is summoned by Wayne, who coldly informs her that Diego murdered his parents the previous night. Rushing to the crime scene, Emily is confronted with the sight of blood splattered across the bed. Officer Mike is there as well. He tells her something strange about how it took 3 men to subdue Diego after he climbed the wall. Emily can't believe what she's hearing, convinced that a 10-year-old boy couldn't possibly have done that. This event leaves Emily deeply shaken.
You can't save the world.
But thankfully, Doug is there to comfort her. Later, when Emily returns home, she finds Lilith flipping through her family photos. This prompts Emily to share her past. Her mother died in a car accident when she was young. The next day, Emily has lunch with Officer Mike. During their conversation, Mike reveals that just before Diego killed his parents, the boy received a suspicious phone call from Emily's house. This confuses Emily, as she swears she never called Diego that night. The two of them head to Emily's house to question Lilith, but Lilith insists she never called Diego that evening. Before Mike leaves that night, he tells Emily that he's certain Lilith is lying. Curious, Emily decides to visit Diego the next day to ask if Lilith called him that night, but he suddenly starts having trouble breathing. Diego is then rushed to the hospital, and Emily tries to question him again. This time, Diego finally speaks. He tells Emily in Spanish that it was a man's voice who called him that night. Emily spends the rest of the day pondering what she's just learned and how a man's voice could have come from her home. Lilith remains with her at the office until Doug arrives to assess Lilith's progress as a formerly abused girl. While alone with Doug, he asks her about the questionnaire she just filled out. Apparently, Lilith answered no to all the questions about fear. Doug then tells her that this couldn't possibly be true and tries to ask her what her greatest fear is. The girl then promises to tell him, but only if he first tells her his greatest fear. It turns out Doug is afraid of wasps. At this point, Lilith starts to behave rudely, admitting that she's afraid of herself because she has bad thoughts about certain people, including Doug. She then warns him that he should be scared of what's about to happen. After the meeting, Doug seems visibly shaken, telling Emily that he's never felt threatened while talking to kids before. During dinner with Lilith that night, we can see Emily beginning to doubt the girl. Later that evening, Doug's landline rings, and when he picks up, he hears a strange noise. Shortly after, a buzzing sound starts in his ear, prompting him to use a Q-tip to try and remove whatever's inside. That's when he sees it. He finds a wasp. Terrified, he flushes it down the toilet, but more of them begin to emerge from his ear. Soon, a swarm of wasps falls onto his back, forcing him to strip off his shirt and throw it into the shower. But it's far from over. The wasps start flying out of other parts of his body, overwhelming him and somehow killing him suddenly. The next scene shows Emily and Lilith attending Doug's funeral, during which Emily's suspicions about the girl only grow stronger. She meets with Mike, trying to convince him that something is seriously wrong with Lilith, and that the girl must be responsible for what happened to Diego and Doug. But of course Mike doesn't believe her. Emily then spends an entire day watching interviews with Lilith's parents in the psychiatric hospital and learns that they believe Lilith has been killing people for years through some kind of mental manipulation. Lilith's mother says that she and her husband used to have siblings, but after Lilith was born, they began dying one by one, and she blames the girl. The mother also says that Lilith can't get rid of them until she finds new friends, which terrifies Emily. Emily then visits Lilith's parents in the psychiatric hospital, where she sees the mother tied to her bed. But it turns out the jump scare is just Emily's hallucination. She then meets with Lilith's father, who is convinced that Lilith is some sort of demonic entity feeding on good people like Emily. He tells Emily that Lilith isn't his daughter, but rather an ancient destructive soul, something like a devil. He also warns her that Lilith will use her greatest fear against her. Terrified, Emily tries to have Lilith removed from her custody, but she can't do it immediately. Then, when Lilith attends group therapy, Emily visits her and rudely pulls Lilith away when she sees her whispering with another girl. Concerned that Lilith might harm others, she tells her that she can't attend group therapy anymore. This enrages Lilith, and then something happens. But it turns out to be another hallucination. Emily is now fully convinced that Lilith is a demon. She tries to talk to Mike about it again, but he still doesn't believe her. That night, Emily installs several locks on her bedroom door, but it turns out that Lilith is standing outside like a haunting figure. The next day, Emily receives a phone call from a client while at work. Unlike her usual kind and patient self, She begins shouting at the caller. Wayne notices this and tells her to go home. He then receives a call saying it's for Emily. When Emily picks up the phone, she hears Lilith's voice, and then Emily suddenly finds herself alone in the office. Everyone else has gone home. She rushes back home, ignoring Lilith on her way to the bedroom. Emily arms herself with a screwdriver and locks herself inside. Sometime during the night, Lilith starts begging Emily to let her in, saying she's scared. The banging soon stops. But then Emily begins hearing noises coming from the closet. Desperately, Emily tries to escape, but a disfigured figure catches up with her. She finds a bus driver willing to let her on. The bus driver is confused, seeing no one chasing Emily. Emily then gets off the bus and into her car, only to be shocked to find Lilith waiting for her. Lilith begins telling Emily that she must do everything she says or else. The terrified woman now has no choice but to comply. The next day, Emily learns that a foster family has been found for Lilith. Emily, unwilling to let Lilith hurt anyone else, visits Lilith's father again to seek advice on what to do. The father tells her that she must put Lilith to sleep, because that's the only time Lilith is vulnerable. Moreover, Emily must not be afraid, as Lilith feeds off people's fear. When Emily returns home, she finds Lilith eerily watching a video of her parents being interviewed in the psychiatric hospital. Lilith then remarks that her parents stopped doing what she wanted them to do and hints that they now have to pay the price. Back at the psychiatric hospital, Lilith's mother begins to hallucinate, imagining herself trapped in a giant oven and burning to death. Meanwhile, her father suddenly kills another patient with a loud snap, and then accidentally stabs his own eye with a fork. After learning of Lilith's parents' deaths, Emily visits Mike again, and this time her police friend believes her. He then shows her a recording of the phone call Lilith made to Doug before he died. In it, Lilith's voice gradually changes into that of a man.
A voice in my head says, "Kill them."
Emily then tells Mike that she has no choice but to kill Lilith. Mike agrees to help her. However, that night, as they go their separate ways to prepare, Mike is ambushed by a dog that suddenly appears in his car. Mike fires his shotgun, accidentally killing himself in the process. Back at home, Emily receives a call informing her of Mike's death. Enraged, she confronts Lilith, knocking over the television in the process. Emily begins shouting at her, demanding that she leave the house. But Lilith responds with a man's voice. Now, more terrified than ever, Emily locks herself in her bedroom. But Lilith starts to scratch away at the door. Emily hides under the bed as Lilith calmly walks in. Her voice continues to shift between that of a little girl and a man. Then she crawls under the bed, telling Emily that she just wants her to love her. Having no choice, Emily complies. Before tucking Lilith in for the night, Emily brews some chamomile tea, lacing it with a heavy dose of sleeping pills. She then makes sure Lilith is fast asleep, ties a knot on her bedroom door, and drenches the house in gasoline. Emily finally sets the house on fire, watching it burn from the outside as she breathes a sigh of relief. However, when she sees Lilith somehow emerge unscathed, she realizes her plan has failed. Following police instructions, the two squeeze into Emily's car and soon start following the patrol car, leading them to a temporary shelter. At this point, Emily is completely fed up with Lilith. She suddenly swerves the car away from the police and begins speeding down the road. Lilith uses her powers to force Emily to relive her past, taking her back to a moment when she was a little girl in a car, with her mother driving recklessly before the crash. Emily manages to overcome the fear and break free from the vision, which frightens Lilith. She suddenly drives the car off the road, plunging it off a dock, sinking them both into the water. As water starts filling the car, Emily attempts to drown Lilith, who begins transforming into some kind of creature. Emily then breaks free from the car, trying to swim to the surface, but Lilith grabs her, pulling her down. However, Emily manages to shake off her grip and swim back to the surface. The movie ends with a breathless Emily staring at the water, finally relieved.